Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.
Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers. Here in our midweek show, Keith, we're going to talk offense for the Seattle Seahawks, specifically kind of what's gone wrong with the Seahawks offense since Munich, essentially, since that Tampa Bay game. The Seahawks had started the season 6-3 to that point, and were looking like they were in a position to at least be real competitive for the NFC West. I think at the time they were the third seed in the entire NFC, and since then the wheels have kind of come off, and we're going to kind of take a look at why that is and if there's any solutions.
Yeah, it's important to note that that's not. It wasn't like, oh, they had a couple of good games and then we're like, oh, what happened? But no, they got off to a little bit of a slow start, playing a couple of really good defenses. But once they got past, Denver and San Francisco, they were just rolled. This was a team that you could count on getting 30 points a game, like every game. And some of the defenses that they rolled through were also good defenses. And then suddenly they go to Germany, and now the offense, you don't know if it's going to score. Like, they had 3 points this last week for most of the game. They finally got a fourth quarter touchdown, but it was slow going.
Yeah. Yeah, when they got to that 6-3 record, they won 5 of the 6 games leading up to that point. You go to Germany, and all of a sudden the offense has been struggling. They've lost 5 of their last 6. Seattle now sits at 7-8. They're completely out of the playoffs looking in. It's just kind of interesting to me. It's on November 9th. We recorded a midweek show after the Seahawks had defeated the Arizona Cardinals, and they improved to 6-3. They were in first place. ESPN had them as the 6th ranked team in the NFL, and nobody was laughing. Nobody was laughing at Geno Smith. He had such a great beginning of the season and consistent performances that he was thought of as the early contender for comeback player of the year. He was in the MVP conversation, not just us, but all around the league. Legitimate conversations were being had as far as extending Geno during the season. While he would be the least expensive, because if he continued that play throughout the season, he was going to be very expensive in the offseason, and we were getting excited about other options in the NFL draft because quarterback wasn't going to have to be one of those deals. Since that time, the running game has gone away on offense. The interior of the offensive line has kind of been exposed. The defense regressed again and had played essentially the last 6 or 7 weeks as though they were in the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season when they were really struggling. They can't stop the run. So there's a lot of things. Geno's been pressing. I think as a combination of having no running game to support the offense and the defense falling behind in games early, Geno's been pressing, making mistakes, fumbling the ball in key moments, throwing interceptions, just throwing into places where he normally, at least during that really good run, wasn't doing. And so the combination has just led to losing 5 of the last 6 and just dropping completely out of the playoff race. Now they have an opportunity, with a little bit of hope, to get into the playoffs, but it doesn't seem like they're set to go anywhere.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and focus in on Geno, because he is been part of why this team has gone from being such a prolific prolific offense to not being able to score points. And you go through and you look at, his stats kind of in a game by game situation. And, that Tampa Bay game is kind of a turning point for him. It's really the week before, but he, at that point, he starts turning the ball over more. And especially, these last like 5 games, he's thrown interceptions in all but one of them. He had 2 interceptions against Carolina, which is how they got beat by a, relatively bad team. His completion percentage has dropped. Because he early in the year he was, at 82%, 80%. There's a lot of games where he's in that, the high 70s, and then in these last few weeks, you run into where it's like 62, 58. I mean, these are fairly pedestrian numbers. Yards per attempt this last week was only at 5.38. Week before 5.4. So it's just not the same quality that of play that we saw early in the season.
In addition, they've been facing some better defenses as well. You can say what you want about the Panthers, but their defense is okay. The 49ers obviously have a great defense, and that kind of explains the lower completion percentage and struggles there, as well as the Chiefs. Say what you want about the Chiefs being kind of a middling defense, and they are ranked 20th and so forth, but I think their strengths on defense played into where Seattle struggles with too as well. I thought that we did come out and run the ball better in the second half against the Chiefs, and I think that helped open up that offense a little bit, but nonetheless, those struggles were there from Geno. I think it really does. For me, when I look at it, there's 2 issues. If you're just sticking to the offensive side, we can talk about the defense a little bit, but it's the running game thing that changed. Pre-Munich, the team was averaging 133.8 yards, running yards per game. After Munich, or Munich, and then after, it's 73.8 running yards per game. And so you take a look at that interior, the offensive line being an issue. I think that alone, just by itself, lends credence to the idea that Geno was pressing, because he was being asked to do a lot. And then you had the defensive side of the situation. At the same time, the offense was struggling. The defense was also struggling a lot. Couldn't stop the run. We were losing the time of possession battle. We were falling behind early in games. And that's a recipe to have any quarterback struggle. And so when I really look at this thing combined, I'm not inclined to completely blame Geno.
Oh, I'm not
for our
trying to
struggles.
completely.
And I know
I'm
you're
just
not.
saying he is. We were talking about the Geno in the passing game, and I'm like, well,
Yes.
there's a place we can start.
Sure.
I do think that he is part of the problem, and it's mostly the turnovers that have ticked up during the stretch. But overall, I mean, there were games where Geno played fine. Geno did his job.
Yes.
It was
the Raiders game, for an example. Yeah.
That's a great one. It was the offensive line and the running game that failed the team that day. And so you're right. That is the far bigger problem. It's not like the interior of the offensive line changed. There was no injury that's being
reported on.
There was no injury on the interior that caused this team to go from being, one of the best rushing teams in the NFL to unable to do anything on the ground. So, yeah, what changed there? Like, I went back and watched some of the tape, and honestly, I don't know why, but they were just getting blown off the ball. Gabe Jackson and Austin Blythe, particular, when this team was struggling to run the ball, and early in this season they weren't. And like I said, there's no reported injury or any of that, but there's got to be something that's gone on there, because those two guys are really dropped off in their quality of play.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously in the NFL, it's individual matchups and facing, increased competition.
I
on
don't
the
know if I
interior
agree with
defensive
that.
lines on the other side of the ball. I mean, that's some of it.
Yeah.
And they're just not that good. I mean, let's just be honest here. Austin Blythe is a bottom 10 percentile center in the NFL. He's undersized. He fits a certain scheme. It's Seattle's scheme, but nonetheless, in our own division, when you're facing Aaron Donald and the interior defensive line of the 49ers, just right there, those teams are going to give you problems.
Well, the 49ers, I mean, I kind of want to throw that game out because that defense is the best in the NFL right now. And so I'm not really considering that game. But I'm looking at, Kansas City, which is an average defense right in the middle of the league. And, they first half, they struggled. You look at the Rams didn't have their star players on defense. There's no Aaron Donald. There's no reason that you shouldn't be dominating in the middle. And the backups came in and just dominated Seattle at the line of scrimmage.
Absolutely. And in order to really examine this, I mean, you really have to focus your film study on Austin Blythe to know exactly what's going on. But I can just tell you, just from the eye test for me and the blocking grades that he's getting, he's struggling with stronger linemen that he's facing. He's getting blown back. He's not creating any push when he's supposed to be, as far as scheme wise, and so he's just not able to do the job. And then you combine that with the diminishing Gabe Jackson to his right, and then Lewis having his own struggles on the left side. The entire interior of our offensive line is breaking down on each play. And you combine that as well with Ken Walker being a rookie and not being as decisive, I think, as the team wants him to be. And I think we saw that in the second half of this Kansas City game, where he's got the athletic traits of a guy that wants to bounce and get outside and go to the path of least resistance. And for Ken Walker, that's his speed and getting outside, and he does really well at that. But there are times where he needs to take the initiative and take that first cut and go and pick up the 3 or 4 yards on the interior. And sometimes he's hesitant to do that. So I think the combination of all those things has impacted Seattle's ability to run the ball this last 6 weeks.
So you saying that, it made me think of, years ago, I was listening to Mike Holmgren talk about Sean Alexander, and he was saying, because Sean Alexander was the same type. He was a guy that could bounce and get outside and do those kind of things. And Holmgren said, yeah, there are times when that's okay. And there are times when we just need you to hit the hole, because we don't need an 8 or 12-yard gain. We need 3 yards. Get the first down. And so they had to tell him, like, there are certain plays, don't freelance, just run the play. And so there is some of that. He was more decisive in the second half. His ability to just run and get to the hole, get up through the hole. There was not a lot of bouncing, not a lot of changing directions, and it led to better things.
And both Pete Carroll and Ken Walker both came out post game and kind of said that really did help open up the offense a little bit in the second half of that game.
And that really was, I mean, that was part of the problem, but it wasn't the rest of the problem. I texted you in the middle of this game, how many times has Ken Walker run into the back of one of his blockers?
Yeah.
And it's a lot.
Yeah. And is that Ken Walker's fault?
No, it's not. That's the offensive lineman's fault, because he's trying to get to a gap, like the B gap between the guard and the tackle. And the guard's just getting pushed back so far into his face, he can't get around them into the gap that he needs to get to. And that's part of the problem. The penetration being given up the middle is making it hard. But then suddenly in the second half, of the Kansas City game, they weren't getting that penetration, and the running game looked a lot better.
Yeah.
Walker went over 100 yards. So I'm just this is, and I watch a lot of offensive line tape. I cannot tell you the difference on why Austin Blythe was getting blown off the ball in the first half and holding his own in the second, unless it's that they were Kansas City was only like looking to defend the pass and they didn't care about the run because of the big lead. But yeah,
So
I mean, that's really all of it.
Apparently, Pete Carroll challenged Ken Walker to run more decisively in the second half and challenge the offensive line to create some lanes. I don't know if that's it or whatever, but I understand that speech or conversation happened in the locker room at halftime there. So, I mean, that could be something. I don't know. So you have to take a look at this thing as a whole. For me, it's like we can focus on Geno, we can focus on the running game, the interior of the offensive line. I think the defense is clearly equally to blame for me as well as to why the offense struggles, because in the NFL, it comes down to time of possession and opportunities, and the Seahawks defense just can't get off the field, and you have less opportunities to be able to create. I think, as the defense gives up scores, especially early in games, Seattle's falling behind. And I think that's where we get into trouble. And that's happened almost every game since the Tampa Bay game. We've fallen behind early in games, and Geno's been pressing, and we've become one-dimensional. So that hasn't helped our running game either. When you only have 12 to 15 attempts in a game, you're not going to be running the ball very well as falling behind by 14 points. Again, we did it in the Kansas City game, fall behind by 14 points. We weren't running the ball effectively in the first half. I was surprised, actually, Keith, when they came out in the second half and rededicated themselves to running the ball, even though they were behind. That showed me something interesting, which was that they were really trying to solve that problem. And they were going to stick to it, even if it had to cost them the game. They were going to run the ball. And I think, there was a time we went up on Tennessee last year early, and Tennessee came back in the second half and ran the ball effectively with Henry and ended up winning that game. And I thought that was kind of the same sort of feeling I had in this game with Seattle trying to run the ball in the second half against Kansas City.
And going back to our first point, if Geno doesn't throw that terrible interception in the end zone, the Seahawks make a game of this. And running the ball mattered. There's another aspect to this. We talked about the offensive.
Wait. What did you just say?
What, that running the ball mattered?
Quote unquote, yes. Ben Baldwin is rolling in his. Yeah,
it is. There's another aspect to this that I think needs to be addressed. Because we talked about the offensive line, we've talked about Ken Walker, being a rookie and those kind of things, and we've talked about Geno pressing and making more mistakes. But there's another part to all of this on why the offense hasn't been working, and I think we need to look at the play calling and Shane Waldron, because when this offense was humming, they were doing a lot of rollouts, a lot of play action, a lot of things where they were moving the pocket in order to give Geno more time and let our super fast receivers get downfield further and open up some space. They haven't done that recently. There's been a lot of straight dropbacks, and I don't know why you change what's working. And so I think that needs to be said, that they have gone away from some of what was really effective early in the season.
What I've noticed on that particular issue for me is the play of the offensive tackles. Early in the season, I think we were seeing surprising results from them, even above league average, and certainly above what we were expecting. And I think it's kind of fallen off the last 6 or 7 weeks, where we've seen more pressure coming from the outsides, and less push when we're running plays, for running plays. And I think they've added more protection. There's been a couple of situations where I've seen 2 tight ends in the backfield flanking the running back, and there's been less rollouts because I think the trust level on the outside has gone away, and so it seems like Shane Waldron is being a little bit more conservative.
So yeah, I mean, you look at Abe Lucas specifically. Early in the season, he was dominating. He was looking like the best tackle in the draft. One of the better right tackles anywhere in the NFL. He was dominating. Against Kansas City, he was dominated. He looked slow. He was leaning and doing things that he wasn't doing earlier in the season. It was not a good look for him. And
he looks tired.
He does. He looks exhausted. And, we talked about this during the game, that the college season is 12 games. This was game 15.
Yeah. And he's kicking snap.
I mean, they are, it's hard on rookies to, go through the season and continue that high level of play for those extra 5 games. And they've reached kind of that point, I think, where Seattle was fueled by rookie talent early in the season. And we haven't talked about Boye Mafe in a while, right? We aren't seeing plays made by Kobe Bryant anymore. And the 2 offensive tackles are struggling more as we get later in the season. I think that plays a role in it.
Interesting. Yeah. And Ken Walker too. He had a pretty decent game. I mean, and he's got an opportunity, he's 800 yards as a rookie, and has an opportunity to get to 1,000 yards if he has a couple of great games coming up here. But really it is kind of a test, if you will, to make it through a season in the NFL, especially as a rookie, especially on those islands, right tackle and left tackle. I think Cross has also struggled at times, especially against speed. He does pretty decent against power, but man, those speed rushers kind of get to him occasionally. Same with Lucas, and also they just miss blocks. It's just one of those things where it's a long season. Coaches scheme against Seattle and these tackles and kind of know by now what the tendencies are, and they take advantage. So I think we're seeing a combination of all of that, really. And then Shane Waldron, to your point, it comes down to opportunities. And I'll say this again, it goes back to the defense. We're losing the time of possession battle almost every game, and Seattle's allowing teams to march up and down the field and run against them and so forth. And I think, schematically wise, you go back to the offense and you change because you're playing catch up. And I think that's some of it too.
Yeah. I mean, you can see the problem with the tackles, I believe, when you start looking at Will Disley and his usage, because when this offense was humming, he was getting out into passing routes quite a bit. He was getting his catches against the Chargers, for example. One of the good teams that they beat during that stretch. He had 4 receptions and had 4 targets against Arizona. But again, so when this offense was humming, he's out in patterns more. But he's one of the best blocking tight ends in the NFL. And when this offense has been struggling, they've been keeping him in to protect one of the tackles.
Yeah.
And that's been,
it's
been telling.
This is a really interesting conversation to me, because this is one of those times and one of those moments where it's really clear to me. This is kind of a complicated issue, but it's really clear to me just how much the entire team has to work together to make each aspect function properly. And when it starts to diminish in certain areas, it really does affect the whole. And I think that's what we're seeing. The defense has not played well, especially along the interior defensive line. They've not been able to stop the run. That leads to more time of possession issues. That leads to falling behind in games, which it makes Geno press a little bit. We run the ball less. Our offensive tackles are struggling. Our interior, offensive line has always struggled. And so all of that, and when the margin of errors are small and the talent deficiency is there, we just don't have enough. It just all of a sudden, it just kind of creates a situation where it's too much to overcome. And that's where we're at. And there's a chance to win a couple games here, get into the playoffs. But like I've said before, and Keith said, I don't think there's enough there to win a game, or if you luck out, maybe. But it's an uphill battle for sure.
Yeah. This also makes me appreciate what Russell Wilson did in Seattle, because he had offensive lines that were worse than this one, and maintained the ability to lead this team, score points, get wins. Yeah, it was ugly sometimes, and they'd go stretches where they couldn't get a first down. And then it felt like he would just kind of will the team back into games. Yeah, he'd play hero ball. He would, make 8 guys miss and run for a first down if because he didn't have time to throw it. He was hit the top of his drop, and he already had 2 people in his face. So it really makes me appreciate what Wilson was able to do with crummy offensive lines in front of him.
So talk to me about solutions. So is there anything we can do to win the next 2 games? Is there anything we could do to win a playoff game? Or, obviously it is what it is. Can we maximize our opportunities though the next few weeks to kind of take advantage?
Well, if the offensive line and the running game start to work like it did the second half against Kansas City, they can begin to open this thing back up. They got Tyler Lockett back, and just continue to run the ball, use and throw off the running game, and just continue to do that. They can get this thing rolling again. It's not a situation where it's broken and unfixable.
I think the defense is broken and unfixable. That's my
really, because they did a pretty good job of shutting down Kansas.
They did a pretty decent job, but I'm telling you, Kansas City did not open up the floodgates.
But they
were
did
pretty conservative.
The number of 3 and outs that Kansas City had, to me, says it had a lot to do. It had a lot to do with the defense, and not just them not putting the gas pedal down.
I think weather was a factor. It was.
But I just look at overall. Is it possible? Sure. Is it likely? No. And the solutions that I see are going to happen during this offseason. They need a new center. They need a new right guard. Right? They need to continue to build the offensive line. That's where this is headed. They need a 3rd wide receiver. But they've needed the 3rd wide receiver forever.
They need a 2nd running back, I think, too.
Yeah, it would be nice. You look in all of that, but the other thing is that you need these rookie tackles to get a full off-season professional level strength and conditioning, offensive, they do that kind of stuff in college, but there's other stuff that's going on. They can't have contact with coaches. They've got to go to classes, all that kind of stuff. It's just different in the pros, and they will go through and get a year of that. And I think that what you're going to see is not just, you're going to see them dominate more, and you're going to see them dominate longer into the season. This drop off, I don't think will happen next year. And that is, going to lead to bigger things.
I'm totally agree. Absolutely 100%. We're getting dominated on both interior, defense and offense, as well as, you just said it, the tackles are struggling a little bit. And I think that really does make a huge difference and will make a huge difference in the offseason. Even if nothing else changed, that would be huge. Interesting. Yeah, so I fully expect them to solve this, but it's not going to happen this year. It just isn't. We just don't have the personnel to do it. It's too late in the year to really address this thing. I think the solution really is to focus in the offseason, in the trenches, and a couple other key positions. But I think that this particular problem gets solved, but it's going to happen in the draft and it's going to happen in free agency because Austin Blythe's just not the guy. We don't have anybody else. Kyle Fuller hasn't played hardly at all this year, which is great, but
it's just good.
He's not much.
We've seen him in the past, and he's terrible,
right? But he's not much of a difference from Austin Blythe. Now, Austin Blythe is a great person, and he's a good line caller, and all that. The continuity there. And he's played almost every snap this year, which is fantastic. But he just doesn't have the functional strength to compete in this NFL environment. He just doesn't. We're just getting dominated there, and it cascades from the inside out, and we need an upgrade there for sure. And it'll be interesting to see how the team views this stretch of games from Geno Smith. And the more I looked at this show and this discussion, I wasn't so sure that this all falls on Geno Smith to the point where it's ruined his opportunities either in the NFL with other teams or contractually with the Seahawks. Now, I don't know that he's going to be the $31 million man anymore, but I also don't know that he's going to be the $15 million guy. I think he's probably somewhere in the middle. It's probably going to be 23, 24 on a 3-year deal with the Seahawks, I think. Now, if they get away with signing him for a 1-year deal at $18 million, they jump on that. Absolutely. I think that he's probably viewed inside the building as more valuable than that, to be completely honest, as far as his leadership quality, his work ethic, his ability to do what he does on the field, as long as everything else is working. And that's true with a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL. He's definitely not the guy that's the top 5 quarterback in the NFL leading a team beyond any other issues to go win you a game. He needs everything else to be well suited, and that's okay.
Which is basically those words that you just said are, he's not a franchise quarterback.
He's not a difference maker as far as being the guy that can go win games consistently on his own.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you just said he's not a franchise quarterback.
That doesn't necessarily mean, I think that you've boxed me in just too far there with what I mean. I don't know that you necessarily have to be that guy to be a franchise quarterback. I think there's a second tier of quarterbacks in the NFL that are still franchise guys that can't do those things. But when you surround them with quality personnel throughout the roster, they can do very well and get you into the playoffs and actually win you games when it comes right down to it. But they need a little bit of help, and Geno's one of those players. He's not the $40 million quarterback. He's not a $20 million. I think he's somewhere in the middle. He doesn't have much time left, though. He's 33. He'll be 34 next year. Does the team invest in him as a future piece and build around him? No, he does. That's why this is somewhat complicated, because the solution, I think, is partially Geno, but it's also probably an investment in a future draft pick, because it's just that time. It's just that, is.
Just go back to what you said earlier. Geno Smith isn't the problem. Geno Smith also isn't the answer. And that's the issue the Seahawks face, and why I still think that 3rd overall pick needs to be of a quarterback, because you got to solve the most important position and do that. Now you can take a guy that you think might be more of a, higher ceiling project, because you re-signed Gino for 1 year, and so you can have that first rounder get slowly acclimated and not be thrown into the wolves week 1. But ultimately, you've got to make that pick. You've got to go and solve the most important position on the roster.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I mean, there are folks like, let's just say Rob Satan came out with a draft this morning or late last night. Saw it on out on Seahawks Twitterverse, and he had Will Levis go number 1 overall in the NFL draft, and he also and his second pick was Chicago trading out of the number 2 spot. I think Carolina came up and he picked Richardson, 2nd overall. Now, I know you don't like that because we've talked about that before, but that's not the point. And then he had Bryce Young going 8 or 10, but Seattle traded out of that.
We should stop with this particular conversation simply because I love Rob. He does a great job, but his reputation, his track record with quarterbacks is awful. He had Matt Barkley as the number 1 overall pick.
Players are irrelevant here. What I'm saying is, he still had Seattle not choosing a quarterback and going interior defense and offensive lines in his first 4 picks. I think there was a safety in there, but what I'm saying is there's still the thought process that maybe, like you said, Gino's not the answer, but he's not the problem. And maybe Seattle views that in a short-term lens as pushing this problem down the road a little bit and addressing other things and looking at a quarterback position later on. I don't know. Yeah.
If you do that, you're going to set yourself up for,
it's true,
you'll never have another opportunity unless you get to the end of this run and the wheels completely fall off and you're in a full rebuild.
Yes.
And you go and do that where you just are terrible for a year, and try and get the 1st or 2nd overall pick. And then,
it is interesting because now we have we're at the positioned at 3rd overall, and then we've got the 12th pick overall currently. There is an opportunity there where we take a quarterback at 12 or 15 if we drop back or whatever. And it's one of those things that you mentioned, a guy that we can groom for a year under Gino and approach it that way and still get our interior defensive tackle at 3 or whatever that is. It's hard for me because I agree with you. If a quarterback's sitting there and Seattle's really looked into it and they decide to go quarterback at 3, I'm all for it. If they look at it and they see Will Levis and Bryce Young and CJ Stroud sitting there, because 2 defensive players went 1-2, and they decide to take a pass, there's something there that, I trust John Schneider evaluating quarterbacks, where they've decided to go in a different direction. I also trust that as well because there are so many different holes in this roster that need to be addressed. And Gino I think has the ability to take the team to a certain point with a good roster. And so,
well, my concern with that is priorities, because it's one thing to go, okay, we're going to take a defensive player, not a quarterback. We think, short-term Gino can get us to where we want to go. But what are you doing? How much are you selling out your future for a window when you don't even have a defense? So their window isn't really open. And you're doing it because Pete Carroll's 71. And if you're making decisions for the future of the franchise based on a 71-year-old coach trying to have one last run, I think that you're setting yourself up to have the bottom completely fall out.
So what you've just said is that if that were to happen, you believe that they're still in win now mode.
Yes.
And making decisions not for the good of the franchise, but for the good of Pete Carroll.
Yeah.
I don't see that. I don't see that happening. I don't know they would never admit that out loud. And I don't know that the evidence necessarily points in that direction.
It's pointed in that direction since Pete Carroll arrived.
It's pointed in that direction since Russell Wilson arrived. Well, I mean, obviously Pete Carroll wants to win, but when you had Russell Wilson here, you were in win now no matter what. Now that he's gone, it becomes a little bit more of a interesting thing. And especially the year that Geno's had makes it complicated because he's an older quarterback, 1 year of success out of many years in the NFL. Obviously older to not build around. So I agree with you. I mean, your strategy is sound. You've got a couple picks. You've got 4 picks in the top 50. Go get your quarterback and then solve your defense with those other 3 picks if you need to, or interior offensive line. That's a sound strategy. I just don't know that, they're going to be boxed in by that, with the mandating they pick a quarterback. If it's not a guy that they love, they'll pass.
Yeah, but if they pass, it's not necessarily that the quarterback's bad, is what I'm saying. I wouldn't look at the Seahawks passing on a quarterback and being like, oh, well, it must have been because the quarterbacks are bad. It's probably because Pete Carroll is like, no, we can win with Geno. Let's get the other pieces. And they're not looking at what this team looks like in 2 years.
Interesting.
So,
wow. Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about that many times, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Well, we didn't solve anything, folks. Come back.
That wasn't the point. The point was to figure out what went wrong.
Yeah.
And I think we did that.
Yeah.
Just incremental decreases in quality along the offensive line. They started getting beat more in the middle, which they were that middle was always an issue. But it started to become a bigger issue. And then the tackles got tired. And it's just all of these little things compounded together. And suddenly something that was humming and just running, wasn't working at all.
Yeah. Crazy. All right. Let's get out of here. Come back in a couple days and we'll have a preview of the New York Jets coming into town on New Year's Day to face the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle is currently still in a playoff race. We'll find out how this thing turns out. So you know where to find us. Make sure you hit the subscribe button when you do and share it if you like it. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWSeahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.